Most modern men believe strength comes with a checklist. 300 grams of protein a day, supplements stacked on supplements, carefully timed meals, optimized routines, precision, control. And even then, many still feel like they are chasing something just out of reach. Now, pause for a moment. Because 2,000 years ago, Roman gladiators built extraordinary strength without any of it. No protein powder, no testosterone boosters, no meal prep containers, no bulking or cutting phases. They didn't track macros, didn't count calories, and didn't eat 20 eggs a day. And yet, they became some of the most physically formidable men the ancient world had ever seen. That raises an uncomfortable question. How did they get so strong with so little? What did they understand about the body, about training, about food, that we seem to have complicated beyond recognition? And more importantly, are we missing something essential while drowning in options? Gladiators weren't chasing an aesthetic. They weren't training to look impressive under perfect lighting. They trained to survive impact, exhaustion, and repeated stress. Their bodies were shaped by purpose, not optimization charts. Strength wasn't something they tried to unlock with products. It was something they built day after day through habits that worked. This isn't a story about rejecting modern science or pretending the past was perfect. It's about understanding how strength was once developed without noise, without excess, and without dependency on an industry designed to sell you more answers than you need. So how did Roman gladiators train? What did they eat? How did they recover? And what are we doing differently now? Not necessarily wrong, but differently, that makes strength feel so complicated. Let's find out. To understand how gladiators got strong, you first need to understand where their strength came from, and it was not a gym. Imagine waking up not in a bedroom, but in a stone barracks. No alarms, no phone screen glow, just the sharp morning air and the weight of discipline. You rise with the sun, not because it is a lifestyle choice, but because the day's training begins early, and being late is not an option. This was life inside the Ludus, a gladiator school. Gladiators were not free men with personal trainers. Many were slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals. They did not choose this life. But once they were in it, they trained like their survival depended on it, because it did. Fights were not always to the death, but the risk was constant. And so, their physical preparation had to be relentless. Training was not built around bulking phases or split routines. It was full body, daily, and brutally functional. They swung heavy wooden weapons, deliberately heavier than what they would use in the arena, to develop power, endurance, and control. They sparred endlessly. They ran laps in full gear, performed bodyweight drills until their muscles burned, and repeated technique drills until they could execute in their sleep. They needed the kind of strength that could absorb a shield blow to the ribs and still counterattack. The kind that did not fade after 2 minutes of combat. And here is where things start to get interesting. Because despite the sheer volume of training, gladiators were not shredded. At least not in the way modern media would have you believe. In fact, Roman accounts and modern archaeology suggest that many had a noticeable layer of fat over their muscle. Not because they were out of shape, but because that layer of fat protected their organs during impact. It was part of the design. They were not sculpted for show. They were built to take hits. In 1993, at a Roman gladiator graveyard unearthed in Ephesus, Turkey, researchers studied over 60 skeletons. What they found was clear. These men had incredibly dense bones and powerful muscle attachments, signs of intense, long-term physical training. But their body composition, inferred from isotopic analysis, pointed to something surprising. They were not eating meat-heavy, high-protein diets. They were eating something else entirely, and it was not what today's fitness influencers would recommend. But we will get to that. First, you need to understand what was missing from their strength training that we now take for granted, and why, somehow, it did not hold them back at all. Strength, for a gladiator, wasn't a performance. It was insurance. Their training wasn't measured in sets and reps. It wasn't logged in an app. It was carved into the body through sheer repetition. And it started with the rudies, a wooden sword heavier than anything used in the arena. They would swing it for hours, over and over, until their forearms screamed and their stances locked into muscle memory. The extra weight wasn't punishment. It was preparation. By the time they picked up a real blade, it felt light, agile, dangerous. Then came the palus, a vertical wooden post used for striking practice. Every gladiator trained alone with the post, drilling combinations, learning range, angles, and footwork. It was as close to a sparring partner as you could get without losing teeth. But do not imagine a silent courtyard of peaceful monks training with discipline and quiet focus. This was chaos, the clang of iron, the bark of instructors, dust rising from the ground as dozens of men drilled under the sun. The training yard of a Ludus was more boot camp than spa, loud, raw, and punishing. Cardio came from running drills in full armor. Agility work came from dodging, pivoting, and fighting in sand. And strength came from moving heavy, awkward objects all day long. Training mimicked the demands of the fight, not to exhaust the body, but to harden it. But here is the twist. Despite all this intensity, gladiators were not training every muscle group in isolation. There was no chest day, no back day, no biceps burnout. There was no need. They trained the whole body at once, because in the arena, the whole body was always at risk. And perhaps most surprising of all, they were not doing this 6 or 7 days a week. Archaeological evidence and ancient writings suggest that recovery was deeply valued. Gladiators received massages, used hot and cold baths, and had structured rest days. They trained hard, but they also recovered hard. And somehow, all of it worked. No fitness watches, no ice baths sponsored by energy drinks, no monthly challenges, just practical strength, tested in real time, under pressure. Which brings us to an even more surprising piece of the puzzle. What exactly were they eating to fuel this kind of training? And how did such simple food support such formidable strength? The Roman gladiators were known by a nickname that at first glance sounds more like an insult than a title of honor. They were called hordearii, barley men. Not steak men, not liver kings, not bicep bros, barley men. And yet, despite the name, these were elite fighters, the equivalent of professional athletes, bodyguards, and action heroes rolled into one. So how did they perform at such high levels, eating what many modern gym-goers would dismiss as peasant food? Their diet was shockingly simple. Historical accounts and archaeological analysis from sites like Ephesus in modern-day Turkey show a diet rich in complex carbohydrates. Barley was the cornerstone, often eaten as a porridge or baked into flatbreads. Alongside that came beans, lentils, seasonal fruits, olive oil, and the occasional addition of cheese, nuts, or dried figs. You might notice what is missing: huge amounts of meat. Gladiators did not feast on chicken breasts and egg whites. In fact, meat was rare and expensive. Instead, their protein came largely from legumes, packed with fiber and slow-releasing energy, which was more useful than a post-workout shake when your next match might be against someone wielding a trident. What is more, these foods were not stripped of nutrients through over-processing or frozen for months. They were grown locally, eaten fresh, and often prepared the same day. There were no artificial flavorings, no preservatives, and nothing designed to last a year on a shelf. Their food went bad because it was still food. So if they were not obsessing over macros, supplements, or bulking phases, what made this basic diet so effective? You might think, sure, that sounds healthy, but can barley and beans really build muscle? The surprising answer? Yes, when paired with the right lifestyle. What made the Gladiator diet so effective was not just what they ate, but how they lived. Their food did not work in isolation. It was part of a daily system that revolved around physical exertion, natural movement, and active recovery. They were not sitting at desks for 10 hours, squeezing in a half-hour gym session, then returning to screen time and stress. Their entire day was built around movement, which turned even humble ingredients into high-performance fuel. Here is another secret. They did not just rely on food for recovery. After battles and intense training, gladiators often consumed a tonic made from plant ash dissolved in vinegar, essentially an ancient electrolyte drink. The ash provided calcium and magnesium, helping with bone strength and muscle function. Not exactly the pre-workout you will find in today's supplement aisle, but shockingly effective. This combination, a clean, simple carb-heavy diet paired with full body movement and rest, created real strength that could hold a shield, wield a sword, and survive daily combat. So, how did gladiators get strong without supplements, whey protein, testosterone boosters, or 300 grams of daily protein? The answer is simpler than you might expect. They did the same things every day, and they did them well. They trained with focus. They ate simple, nourishing food. They moved often. They rested deeply. And above all, they didn't expect instant results. There was no shortcut, no secret. Just repetition, consistency, and the daily grind of showing up. And maybe that's the real takeaway. In the modern world, we're obsessed with optimizing every detail, as long as it means we don't have to slow down. We want results fast, with as little effort as possible. But strength, real lasting strength, doesn't come in a bottle or a barcode. It's something you build. Slowly, deliberately, just like they did 2,000 years ago. If you're curious about what ancient lives can still teach us about strength, simplicity, or the habits we've forgotten, hit subscribe. We're just getting started uncovering the wisdom buried in the past and how it might still shape the way we live today.